Welcome to ASEAN Insights, Understanding Southeast Asia, the premier podcast that examines current dynamics defining the region. Brought to you by the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, each episode we will talk with thought leaders who are shaping the future of the region through research, policy, activism, or business. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Lydia, Ruddy, Special Advisor to the President of ERIA on US-ASEAN Affairs and Director of Communication, the host of today's podcast. Today, it's my great pleasure to sit down with Professor Akiko Yamanaka, Special Advisor to the President of ERIA, former Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and Special Ambassador for Peacebuilding, Japan. She's also been a fellow at Cambridge University and at the think tank CSIS in Washington, D.C., as well as a visiting researcher at Oxford University and a visiting professor at the Graduate School of Hokkaido University, as well as at the United Nations University. So welcome, Yamanaka-san, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Lydia, for your kind introduction.
So you have written extensively about preventative diplomacy and human security, issues that are at the forefront of global discourse as we witness areas of conflict erupting across multiple geographies, Ukraine, and then closer to home in Myanmar, for example. So let me ask a definitional question first. What is human security and how is it related to preventative diplomacy?
Human security is the idea that the people have the right to live in freedom and dignity, free from poverty and despair, with an equal opportunity to enjoy all their lives and fully develop their human potential. I believe that the combination of human security as a framework and preventive diplomacy as the activities necessary to realize this idea should be reintroduced systematically at the United Nations to function itself. Let me introduce human security and preventive diplomacy very briefly. Famous economist processes human security as a new paradigm of security in 1994 at the United Nations Human Development. The world is entering a new era in which they have concept of security will change and change dramatically. Security will be human priorities, equality, poverty, education, health, peace, employment, equal rights for women, political freedom, and social justice. On the agenda of development strategies, he really put focus on economic, food, health, environmental, personal, community, and political security. He also said that human security means a child who didn't die, a disease that didn't spread, an ethic tension that didn't explode, a dissident who was not silenced, a human spirit that was not crushed. Then how we can realize the concept of human security, we should go back to the United Nations traditional activities, preventive diplomacy. Preventive diplomacy was introduced by the second Secretary General of Dag Hammarskjöld in 1960 in order to block the clash between the West, NATO, and the East, Warsaw Pact, and enable the United Nations forces for peacekeeping forces. And the sixth Secretary General of UN, Boutros Ghali, challenged to embody this concept in 1992. However, the following Secretary Generals did not care so much about this concept because the Iron Curtain was lifted, the wall of Berlin was broken, and the world looks like more peaceful. I would explain very briefly about 4 steps of preventive diplomacy for war and conflict. 1, preventing conflict from breaking out. 2, preventing conflict from expanding. 3, promoting ceasefires and stop the conflict to enable recovery. And 4th, preventive the resumption of hostilities. As you know, more than 40% of the current conflicts in the world are recurring. The preventive diplomacy can be applied for natural disasters as well as pandemic like COVID-19 as well. I will talk about it later.
So let me ask you a question related to the headlines. What should leaders be doing right now to address the conflicts?
I think that I would like to say common interests. Common interest, it means that we have national interest and international interest. And common interest is the same feeling with the international interest. So when we look at the world at this moment, really most developed country nation would like to establish mutual rules and ally with the common interests. However, if on the global stage, only a strong wins the weaker on the bilateral negotiation, no one else in this complicated and interconnected world will survive. And I think that even the winner will suffer a backlash as common interests reassert themselves in a boomerang effect. The urgent need to spread the concept of protection, common interests, to the leaders who do not yet realize its importance it underlined. And actually, we can see some or several world leaders who do not yet realize it.
Yeah, yeah, very good point. Just a quick question about common interests. Is that something that comes out of human security, or is that a separate approach?
Common interest is a little bit separate, but of course, it common interest really based on community interest as well as political interest. Sorry, it's really based on community security, political security, as well as personal security. But I think that recently, I just think common interest is rather new words, but it's really fit at this moment. We can really must it to be spreaded.
Yeah,
Or introduced.
thank you. Last year, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made a very pointed remark about the lack of emphasis on peace building and prevention of conflict when he said, "We have war correspondents, not peace correspondents." So, what role does the UN play in addressing these issues?
I think it's really important because United Nations is the biggest and most powerful international organization that almost every nation state are a member. And of course, as you know, when it was started in just after the World War II, the number of the nations were more than 80. However, at this moment, it's 190 something. So there are many countries which were the countries who were not exist at that time. So that's why I think that we have to really reconsider the function and also purpose of the United Nations. So I think that Secretary Guterres said refers to the peace building. It's very important. And actually, I think 2005, I worked on how to establish the Committee of Peacebuilding. However, it really doesn't work because it doesn't have a power. And as you know quite well, everybody knows that Security Council of the United Nations is the most powerful committee. And it's really more power than the General Assembly. So that's why this time, for example, if I can really touch a little bit about the Ukraine issue embedded by Russia, Russia can use veto, and so that the United Nations cannot really send even peace peace building force or something like that. But when we read carefully, it says the Secretary General will work together with the Security Council to make the world peace. And I really feel if the Security Council doesn't work like this, then I think that we have to give the power. And also, even if he doesn't have a power, but he can challenge to really talk with Russia to cease fire. We are in the third stage of promoting ceasefire. Anyway, we have to make ceasefire. So I think that he can work together with the High Commissioner for the humanities and also High Commissioner for refugees together, that as a United Nations Secretary, not just a kind of statement, but try to talk with the president of Russia and encourage him that he has to stop. That would be the first step for reform of the United Nations. And I think that the United Nations is the most important. But at this moment, it looks like doesn't function well enough. So because the United Nations is the third party, is actually not for Russia, not for Ukraine. So they can do that. But if like a NATO and Russia and EU and Russia, it's just like a rivalry situation. And Russia and Ukraine bilateral negotiation is very difficult because it is influenced by the power. So that's why I think that it is the timing for everybody to really make, to be honest, General Assembly should have more power than the Security Council, because Security Council was actually, who has veto is the winners of the World War II. And Japan still belonged to the item enemy. But no one in the world thinks that Japan is the enemy of the world anymore. So that's why we have to really make United Nations stronger. And in order to try to challenge it, I really hope the Secretary General Guterres can take one action. And everybody have to, every nation, not every nation, I would say, some said no, but still most of the 140 nation states will support him. So hopefully that could be a challenge.
It's a challenge for all the leaders of the world to address, to support the United Nations. Do you want to say anything about Myanmar in the United Nations, the role that the United Nations has played in Myanmar?
Myanmar is slightly different because Myanmar issue is domestic neglect of the human rights that we can see here and there. Actually, not only Myanmar, but Myanmar is a symbol, and especially from human security point of view, the personal security, which aims to protect from the physical violence, whether from the state or outside state, is neglected. And so therefore, I believe that the United Nations, especially the High Commissioner for Human Rights, should work on this matter fully, supported by the Secretary General and other nation states, because the High Commissioner for Human Rights at this moment is Ms. Bachelet, the former president of Chile. She has experienced to be restrained and tortured with her mother, and her father was tortured to die domestically. So, but in order to do so, I believe the support and help from ASEAN nation states is essential, because if ASEAN nation state or Asian nation state do not support her, it's very difficult. So that's why I think it's not just only United Nations, but the United Nations should talk with ASEAN nation state. And it's not really violence, but have to tell the military government in Myanmar. Otherwise, I think without knowing, without really realizing by the other world community, anything can be happened, like which had happened in Chile before. So I hope that we can encourage.
So just a follow-up, how can the ASEAN member states support the UN in Myanmar? Are there concrete actions they could be taking?
I think, I'm sure, to be honest, it's very difficult because Myanmar is a part of ASEAN. So that's why ASEAN nation state cannot say you should stop directly. But everybody think that it's not the right way to do. So that's why I think that the United Nations can take initial role so that the ASEAN nation state can support it. Sorry, to be honest, I think if you are in the international world as a vice minister for foreign affairs, we learn probably more. So that's why it's not so simple and easy that ASEAN nation states said, you shouldn't do this. But if United Nations is going to really try to do something.
So, as you've said, central to the human security approach is the idea that people have the right to live in freedom and dignity, free from poverty and despair, and that they have equal opportunities to enjoy their rights and develop their human potential. So there's a lot of elements underpinning this approach. It's economics, it's health, it's environment, I guess it's politics. So in fact, one could argue that the pandemic has exposed the weaknesses of traditional security approach, and that human security should be the basis for how we develop policies that not only help us recover from the pandemic crisis, but help us to be prepared for future pandemics. So what areas do you think ASEAN or ASEAN member states need to address in order to maximize human security in the region? And if you have any examples?
I think that, of course, health security aims to guarantee a minimum protection from diseases and unhealthy lifestyles. In developing countries, the major causes of death traditionally were infectious and pandemic diseases. So that's why I think that I can introduce to the ASEAN nation states about the preventive diplomacy apply for the pandemic like COVID-19. Then again, 4 stages, and the stage 1 is infection disease control, means preventing asymptomatic spread. 2, infectious prevention through social measures. 3, eradication of new infections. And 4, preventing the spread of recurring or new diseases. And I would introduce a challenge of Taiwan and Germany, when at the beginning of the COVID-19 in 2020, both countries were very successful according to this procedure, though the actual ways were different according to the situation of the nations. And so that's why we don't have to do the same thing, but we can take the kind of concept and the activities which based on the preventive diplomacy. And then Taiwan is an island, so therefore it has kept to have lower rate of infections. Though Germany was surrounded by 9 nations, and the Schengen Agreement allows every nations who have borders must be opened. Therefore, Germany has had difficulties to the eradication of new infections. However, I think that they have established a new kind of medical system that the hospital should be for the COVID-19 and the hospitals for the ordinary patients and all those kind of things. So at the end of March 2020, German actually accepted the very heavy infections from Italy, from France, and to really cure them. So I think that these 4 stages is really helpful for the ASEAN nation state. And I think that health security should be challenged at the first stage because it's really depends on the country. But you can choose a way and then to really reform of the medical system. And in addition to this, the education is also very, very important to have a habit to wash your hands or all those things are very much, I think, learned from Japan. Because actually Japan was suffered by SARS. So that's why we have a kind of habit to have a masks. But from the beginning of like elementary school or even kindergarten, at home and also the school, every child wash hands when you come back. So those kind of, I think that daily habit should be spread in ASEAN nation states.
Yeah, good. You mentioned that one of the early problems that Germany faced was the fact that it has open borders, and so it's made it very easy for the population to keep getting infected. But then they were able to develop high-level hospitals that could treat the pandemic. So ASEAN is really looking at opening borders between the countries, but when the pandemic hit, every single ASEAN country closed its borders just completely, and they stayed shut for a very, very long time. Would there be a way, do you think, for ASEAN countries to keep their borders open so that people could travel to where treatment was better?
I think that because this COVID-19 is really at this moment BA2 instead of the original one. Many different, I think that types of the new virus is coming. So that's why it lasts longer than we had expected. So we have to take a balance between the of course, protection of the people from COVID, but we have to really keep our economy mobilized. Otherwise, it's really difficult. So that's why I think that the vaccine is very important. And ASEAN nation states, the ratio of vaccine the third time is not as high as we had expected. So this is one thing. The second thing is the medicine which we can take. Some countries have of course, invented, and Japan is also trying to really invent the new ones. So if we can have the medicine, then it's much easier for everybody who can take medicine if you have caught by the COVID-19. So we have to wait a little while until that time. But how to take a balance is really depend on the nation states. So I think ASEAN.
Well,
Mm.
it's an what you said also raises another issue that I was thinking about with the vaccines and the fact that so many countries didn't have access to vaccines originally. So again, this goes back to the health security and the role of the UN. What is the how can health security and human security improve the vaccine situation for people around the world?
To be honest, of course, WHO is a part of UN. However, WHO doesn't have so much power and so much, I would say, budget to really buy and spread. So that's why I think that we have to make a kind of mechanism beforehand or afterward of this COVID-19 is before the next pandemic, how we can share these vaccines or the medicine to the developing nation states, because developing nation states can buy by yourselves, but I mean the nations, but developing countries is really difficult. So that's why we have to make a kind of mechanism how this could be spread. If you say, please spread the other country or please give the other country just invoice, doesn't work. So that's why we need to establish new mechanism. I think this again, sorry for that, but not only just leave WHO, but I think that this time Security Council would work, I hope, so to try to make mechanism. Because I don't think that any country in the Security Council would really use veto to vaccine spread. So that's why this is something that we can do.
Okay, so you're saying that this new mechanism to help with sharing the vaccine across to developing countries would actually be sort of housed or managed and under the Security Council, not WHO?
No, WHO is the main one. We cannot ignore it. However, WHO doesn't really have so much power. So that's why Security Council should support WHO to try to make a mechanism.
And, we kept hearing about vaccine diplomacy. Is that sort of a form of preventative diplomacy?
I think it's a part of that. That is the second, I think, category to lead at the second and fourth. That means we are going to prevent expanding of the infections. That one thing, and the second one, but the fourth one, we have to really prepare for the next or reoccurring of the pandemic. Again, vaccine is very, very useful for that. So the second stage, the fourth stage, we need to really have a mechanism to spread the vaccine for the people worldwide.
Yeah. I'm going to go on to question 5. So, are there any good examples of national policies that incorporate human security? So I'm reminded of Bhutan's gross national happiness.
Lydia, thank you for referring Bhutan. I think it's very, very wonderful case, and which I hope that introduced to the ASEAN nation states by ERIA, because, of course, in order to achieve human security, it takes time. and therefore continuous efforts are needed. And if we remember the Bhutan case, actually it started in 1972. And at that time that the king, can't really do as well, but the Jigumi Shinge Wanchok of Bhutan declared its wonderful declaration that said, he said, gross national happiness is more important than gross domestic product. The concept implies sustainable development should take a holistic approach toward the nations of progress and give equal importance to non-economic aspects of well-being. And he really tried to actually approach from 9 index gross national happiness. And may I use the 9 one?
Sure. So it's the 9 domains index, which is part of, where does that come from?
9 gross national happiness index include 9 domains. First one is psychological well-being. Second one is health. Third one, education. And fourth one is so interesting. Fourth one is time use. And fifth one is cultural diversity and resilience. And the sixth one is good governance, of course. And then seventh one is community vitality. And eighth one is ecological diversity and resilience. And the ninth one is living standards. We always think about what is the actually GDP is or something like that. But this 9 approaches, it takes time, but still it's very important. So if ERIA can introduce this 9 domains or the concept of the gross national happiness to ASEAN nation states, that would be wonderful. I think that a goal of at the post-COVID-19 era.
Yeah, it's interesting because ERIA is, after all, an economic research institute. So the economists are normally working on the economics and the GDP type of measures. So what you're requesting is it's a challenge for ERIA.
Economic security is not the new concept. It's really started in 1994. But in order to achieve the economic security, we need wider view and, of course, happiness of the people is the main goal. So I think this is wonderful.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And actually, I know that our economists do too. And quite a few of them are probably all of them do take a less completely traditional approach to their work. So a lot more development orientation, which I think is more in line with what you're talking about. So just to be fair to our economists. Lastly, we haven't even touched upon many other key topics when it comes to human security. So we've got climate change, we've got the fourth industrial revolution, natural disasters in this region. So would you like to say anything about any of these?
Lydia, as you know quite well, ASEAN nation state and especially Asia suffered from the natural disasters so often. So that's why I think that this environmental security, of course, environmental security is wider concept. However, I would like to just focus on the disaster prevention. And again, I would like to combine with the preventive diplomacy application for the natural disaster. Then the one is preparing for natural disasters before they happen. We cannot stop it. However, we can prepare because we have a history, what kind of natural disaster happened before, like 100 years before or 30 years before. And the second is rescuing victims quickly. This is anyway important. And the third stage is disaster recovery. And the fourth stage is focus on reconstruction and reducing future risk from disasters. And in addition to the above, I believe the education of the disaster prevention is very effective. And in Japan, every elementary school has this course. And I think that part of Indonesia, like Aceh, challenges to this education, but not everywhere yet. So I think that this is very, very important. And I think at post-COVID-19 era, I believe that the new lifestyle will be introduced because I think that the 20th century was a century to really everybody really appreciate big, fast, heavy. However, 21st century now, especially after post-COVID-19, we have to think about slow, little, light, in other words, more comfortable lifestyle, which fits to the lifestyle in Asia, especially in ASEAN nations. So I just wanted to introduce a word of Kenneth Galbraith, the past Kenneth Galbraith, the Harvard University economic professor, mentioned to me. When I met him for the first time in 1994, when I served as the professor of the university, he said, Akiko, Japan and the United States have succeeded to produce excellent products. However, it is doubtful if we have succeeded. They are happy people. And when I met him in 1997, at the second time, at that time I served as the member of the Diet in Japan. He said, as a Diet member, you have to remember 21st century will be the century that has three main program. The first one is the program of rich and poor. The second one is the program of nuclear issue. The third one is the program of traditional discrimination like race, religion, nationality, gender, and so on. And we are now 21st century and all of those comes. And when I met him for the last time, the third time is 2001, he was in the wheelchair. He stand up and said 3 times, Akiko, Japan should establish own identity, not just for the United States. He said 3 times. And I really realized, of course, our democratic world is very, very important. But of course, we, each nation, have to have our own identity. So even if the kind of loose connection is really different from next country to the other one, except hegemonious countries, but I think that we can be together. So that's why I think the human security and the preventive diplomacy is a kind of basic idea, but actual action should be really up to your own country and nation, but we can share the base philosophy and concept and work together or help one another. That and the United Nations law is more important, so we should really make the United Nations more function.
Well, Yamanaka-san, I wish that there were more leaders who had your outlook and perspective. And so it's a depth of knowledge and it's a positive outlook. It's very impressive, and I very much I've enjoyed this conversation, and I want to end it on this positive note about working together. I think it's very important, and strengthening the UN is a great place to stop, as you have brought this up several times during the discussion. So thank you again for joining today, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Lydia-san, to really give me this opportunity to be able to share a humble thought, but still, I really would like to contribute more to the ASEAN nation states, and especially Asia, as a 21st century's democratic nation states.
If you have any questions about the issues explored in this episode, email us at contactus@eria.org. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other streaming platforms so that you will be notified about future sessions.